Paper checks are far more expensive than you might think. Too often, when asked about the cost of issuing a paper check, people say something like, it's in the neighborhood of $1, given they take into account the cost of the postage, the envelope, and not much else. But what they don't realize is they are greatly, greatly underestimating the cost of issuing that check. The true cost is much, much higher. Let's see why. Stick around for a few simple tips on lowering the cost of these unnecessary expenses, which we'll have at the end after we go over an explanation of why it really is more expensive to issue paper checks than you might think. Hi, guys. I'm Mary Schaefer, founder of AP Now, a membership organization where we compile best practice information on all issues related to the accounts payable and payments function. We have another accounts payable soundbite for you. Okay, back to paper checks. Let's start with the cost and why I think it's much more expensive than people think. Yeah, you have to include the cost of the paper check, whatever you pay to get it printed, the envelope, the postage, but there's a lot more that goes into it. It's the people cost, the salaries that you have to pay, and the related costs to those salaries to get people to do it, and the amount of time that they spend on these paper checks. It includes things like getting manual signatures if you are, stuffing them in the envelopes if you're still doing that. If you're printing 3-part checks, which some of you are, it's bursting them, removing backup or attaching backup if you still need to do that, stuffing envelopes, taking to the mailroom, okay? These people costs add up, and they add up fast. So in actuality, if you are still printing your checks yourself, a realistic all-in cost is probably somewhere between $10 and $20, okay? Okay, the next issue related to paper checks that adds to the expense that many people never take into account is the unclaimed property issue. Uncashed paper checks are considered unclaimed property by the states. Now, in actuality, only about a third of all companies are reporting and remitting as they should be. So I wanted to share with you a little story. Some of you actually may have seen this. We recently did a global summit with some folks in the UK. We had one session where we talked about the different accounts payable functions and how we do them in the US and how they do them in the UK. And a lot of the stuff was the same. I mean, we've got all the same problems around the world. And then we started going over some issues, and I got to unclaimed property, which, if you're an American and you know a little bit about unclaimed property, you know we got this concept from the Brits. So I brought up unclaimed property, and they looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "It's cheat." And they're like, "We don't do that over here." And I thought about it for a minute, and then a light went off. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, of course they don't do it over there. They don't issue paper checks." So another problem that you can kind of get rid of, if you will, if you're not issuing paper checks. And if you've listened to me before, I'm a big proponent of electronic payments. Now, not only are the costs, the headaches of unclaimed property, but there are a whole lot of other headaches related to paper checks, which will also increase your cost. Sometimes they get lost in the mail, and then the vendor calls up because they think you didn't pay them, and you have to deal with that, and you have to put a stop payment on the lost check and issue a new one. Okay, takes a lot of time, and it's non-valuated work, except it has to be done. Some of you will have vendors who continually call up with questions that have to be responded to. Some of them are legitimate, some of them aren't, but you still have to respond to them. In the US anyway, the mail has been slower than it was in the past, and this means that the check that you mail on the 25th because it's due on the 30th may not get there until the 1st or 2nd of the next month. So that adds additional issues to it. And another reason why maybe vendors who were reluctant to take electronic payments in the past may be a little bit more amenable to it these days. Bank recs are much harder to do when everything isn't clearing the next day. And you know how much time you spend on bank recs and what a pain they are also. Check fraud continues to be a problem, and we have to guard against that, and we have to constantly be alert. You need to follow up on uncashed checks because of the unclaimed property, and you need to find out what happened. Again, this all takes time and effort. And then when we have checks, we have people who continually come down. They have their last-minute emergencies. Yeah, they would have a last-minute emergency if you were paying electronically, but it's a lot easier to make an electronic payment at the last minute than it is to issue that paper check. You got to get the checkbook out. Somebody's got to print it. You got to get the check signed, the whole rigmarole. And lastly, Those people who want their checks returned to them, I don't know, some of them have good reasons, most of them don't. They want to see it, they want to make sure the check gets in the mail, a whole bunch of other things of questionable value, let me put it to you that way. Well, if you're making an electronic payment and you don't have that check or you paid with a credit card, there's no check to return. So that conversation and that issue goes away. Okay. Before we get to some simple steps you can take to eliminate some of these costs and headaches associated with paper checks, I'd like to invite you to hit that subscribe button. It's free, completely private, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Of course, you're not going to want to. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe with a Gmail account, and you can hit that bell next to the subscribe button to be notified when we post new content, which we do 3 times a week now. Tuesdays and Thursdays are for accounts payable and payment issues, and Saturday morning for a little fun, we post some Wordle videos. Okay, so I promised that I give you some tips on how to get rid of some of these annoying paper checks and thus reduce your expenses related to them. For your smaller invoices especially, you can start paying with a P card. P card is a company credit card. That's number one. Number two, you can publish your cutoff schedule so people know when they have to have their invoices approved to accounts payable in order to be included in the current payment run. Hopefully, by publicizing this and making this well known to everyone, if you will, this will reduce the number of paper checks. Next, you can make sure that your suppliers know what to expect, know when they will be paid so they can stop calling you up saying, when is my check going to be issued? When is my payment going to be made? You might include that in some of your correspondence with the vendors, especially when your new vendor set up. Okay? And lastly, just do whatever you can to reduce the number of paper checks. This means looking at alternatives like P cards, ACH, and of course now we're just starting to see instant and real-time payments. And you'll hear a lot more about that as time goes by. Now, paper checks aren't the only area in AP where there's some serious misconceptions, both inside the department and outside. There's one AP metric that makes my hair stand up that creates a similar issue. You can watch a short video on that topic right now, as well as one on instant or real-time payments. We've got links to both of them in the show notes below, and on YouTube, links will appear to both of them as always. And as always, I greatly appreciate your thumbs up, your shares, your comments, and your subscribes.